I want to know, and I think you want to know, whether or not that laptop found in the repair shop actually belonged to Hunter Biden and whether the emails on them are authentic. But we're not going to find out because NPR, National Public Radio, has abdicated its responsibility by telling us they're not going to investigate. They're not going to report. The same thing was true with Facebook and Twitter. And, am I the only source now of news and analysis? I wish we would go back to the day when investigative reporters looked into everything and left it to us, the voter, to decide whether it's relevant. So that's part of democracy. Another part of democracy I'm talking about on the Dirt Show today is whether or not we should have judges appointed for life. I don't think so. That's too long. That's for kings. That's for popes. That maybe is for professors. It's not for people who serve for the government of the United States, even as judges. That's what you'll hear about today on the Dirt Show. Millions of Americans are now voting, and many, many more will vote on November 3rd. And what we won't know at the time we cast our ballot is whether there is any truth at all to the claims that Joe Biden's son, Hunter, had a laptop which he left at a repair shop, which contains emails that are suggestive of some possible misconduct on the part of Hunter Biden and some allegations that conceivably could reach Joe Biden. I like Joe Biden. I've known him for years. I do not believe he is in any way corrupt. And I'd like to see the allegations disproved. But right now, they have not been disproved. What we hear on every radio show and every television show from the major media, when they talk about the allegations, they say unverified, disproved, etc. That's just not the case. We don't know. As far as I know, Joe Biden has never been asked the simple question, do you know whether that laptop belonged to your son? Do you know whether the emails contained in that laptop were actually sent by your son? I've read some of the emails, and they're quite disturbing. There's one, for example, which talks about getting David Boies and his law firm involved and giving them a piece of the action. We all know that the Boies law firm, particularly David Boies, has been accused of ethical misconduct more than any other lawyer and prominent law firm in America today. They are a case study in being charged with questionable behavior. There are now many, many allegations involving Boies in the Theranos case and many other cases. And indeed, as you know, I filed bar charges against David Boies. I've been following his career. We're involved in a lawsuit together. But the very fact that they offered him a part of the deal makes it sound credible to me. Anything wrong with that? We'll see. I don't understand why there isn't an investigative journalist looking deeply into this. We know that NPR has made a policy statement, National Public Radio funded by the United States government, has said they will not cover this story. The Wall Street Journal apparently put some journalists onto it and decided that it was a distraction and it was not relevant to the current election. Well, think back to what happened with Hillary Clinton. If anything was ever a distraction, it was the way Comey handled the investigation there, which may have had an impact on the election. I think what we're seeing is a concern not to repeat that issue, but that doesn't impact whether it should be reported. We're not talking about whether or not the head of the FBI should make an announcement. He has refused to confirm whether there is or isn't an investigation. That's absolutely proper. That's the role of the FBI. But the role of journalists is to ask hard questions. Look, I do think on the 60-minute interview that I saw the other day, when Leslie Stahl said, I'm going to start by asking you, President Trump, some very hard questions. And Trump responded by saying, well, why don't you ask Biden some hard questions? And again, I'm not here to tell you who to vote for. I'm not here even to tell you who I am voting for. I am here, however, to say that I'm very concerned about the press. It started with Twitter and Facebook refusing to cover the New York Post's story. Then it moved to the Wall Street Journal, which I have no complaint about. They apparently investigated it thoroughly and came to a journalistic decision that they would only have a small story about it, but would not give it the kind of major coverage that apparently the Trump administration wanted them to give it. Wall Street Journal should not take orders from the government, from the Trump administration, from Biden, or from anybody else. They are independent, they remain independent. But for NPR to say, we're not going to cover the story at all, we're not going to put a journalist onto it, we're not even going to ask President Biden the obvious question or try to reach Hunter Biden and ask Hunter Biden, is it your laptop? Yes or no? There's no intermediate there. It's either his laptop or it's not. Are these your emails? Yes or no? There might be a gray area. He might say some of them are my emails, some I don't recognize. Maybe it's a legitimate laptop, but maybe disinformation people put emails on it that were not proper. Maybe they changed words here and there. We know that's possible. We know there have been emails which have been doctored and changed by people with bad intentions. The point is, I'm here speaking today not as a Democrat, not as a Republican, not as a Trump supporter, not as a Biden supporter, but as an informed reader, knowledgeable voter. I want to know. Do you want to know? It may not even affect your vote, but don't you think you have a right to know? A right to know what the truth is, and then you can calibrate and you can do nuance and you can say on the one hand, on the other hand, but you can't engage in that analysis unless you know the facts. Now, NPR is in a unique position because they are funded by the United States government, and as such, they are required to be neutral and objective, unlike the New York Times, which not only is not required to be neutral and objective, it wouldn't even know the meaning of those terms in the most recent manifestation of the great newspaper of record in the world today, which puts its editorials now on the front page of the newspaper. Not so with the Wall Street Journal. The Wall Street Journal has a strict separation between news analysis, op-eds, editorials. They have become the paradigm of fair and accurate reporting. Yeah, their editorial pages lean a bit to the right, but their news analysis is spot on. So NPR has an obligation by law to be objective and nonpartisan. And I worry that it may have breached that obligation and may be breaching its obligation as we speak if they categorically refuse to cover a story that many voters would like to know. I don't regard myself as an unintelligent or partisan voter, and I wish I didn't want to know, but I do want to know. I have a right to know whether or not that laptop belonged to Hunter Biden. I have a right to know whether or not those emails were written by him and to him. I have a right to know who he was referring to, what they were referring to when they talked about the big man. We have a right to know why they offered the boys Schiller firm a piece of the action. That's not typical of the way lawyers are involved in cases. We know already that Boys, in the Theranos case, where she has been indicted, the head of the company, and all kinds of corruption, we know that David Boies served both on the board of directors and as a lawyer, which in my mind at least is an obvious conflict of interest. Was the same thing offered to them here? These are issues that should be explored. You know, Saturday Night Live the other night had a skit. I was spoofed in it. Okay, I can take that. They turned me into a dancer who was a lawyer. But they got one great line on Saturday Night Live this week. They said, it tells us something about this country when the best investigative reporter is Borat. Borat! We watched this movie the other day. It was pretty funny. I didn't like what they did to Rudy Giuliani. I thought that was an unfair setup. But when Borat becomes the best investigative reporter, better than NPR, better than, Twitter and Facebook, we have a problem. I want to talk about another problem today as well. Vice President Biden has announced that if he becomes president, he will appoint a commission to study the future of the courts and the Supreme Court in particular over the next 6 months after he is elected. And then he will make policy judgments based on the recommendations of that bipartisan commission. And there are a lot of harebrained ideas out there that the commission will consider. But one of them, I think, is really worth serious thought. And that is ending lifetime appointments for Supreme Court justices, indeed for all federal judges. Right now, under the Constitution, judges serve during good behavior, which has been interpreted to mean until they die or retire or are impeached or do something that warrants removal from the bench. Because it's good behavior, judges have been removed for drunkenness and other kinds of things. But if a judge behaves herself or himself, they can serve for 40 years on the court until the end of their life. We will now see the confirmation of Judge Amy Coney Barrett. And if she lives as long as Ruth Bader Ginsburg, she will serve nearly 40 years. She will probably beat Justice William Douglas's service on the court. Douglas was appointed, I think, when he was 39, confirmed when he was 40. He was really a young man with very little experience. He had been a professor at Yale Law School. He had been a chairman, I think, of the SEC. He was a Roosevelt protege, and he served with great distinction on the court until he was about 75 or 76 years old. I knew him. I served as a law clerk on the Supreme Court when the justices included Douglas, who had been serving then for 30-something years, Hugo Black, who had been serving for a long time as well. And I have to tell you, these justices were great people, but they were set in their ways. There was no arguing with them. There was no persuading them. You could predict what they would say in almost every case. I had a sense that, serving on the court for such a long time doesn't make for the most creative, the most interesting justices. And I just think that term limits, say 18-year term, you get appointed when you're 50, you serve to 68, you get appointed when you're 60, you serve to 78. An 18-year term limit is about right. Lifetime appointments are for kings, popes, and maybe professors. We get tenure and we can serve during good behavior and for life too. I didn't. I retired at 75. But I had the right to serve until I was 95 or however long God gave me life. I'm not sure that's appropriate for professors. It surely is not appropriate for anybody serving in the government of the United States. So among the new innovations to be considered, I think the best one is term limits, not a mandatory retirement age. Let me tell you the difference. Mandatory retirement age is a terrible, terrible idea. Let's assume the mandatory retirement age is 70 or 75. That incentivizes presidents to appoint younger and younger and younger justices because they want them to serve 40 years. So if the mandatory retirement age is 75, they're going to appoint justices who are 35. That's not going to serve the interests of the court. I want a system that disincentivizes presidents from appointing extremely young people. Remember, some of our great justices were appointed at older ages. Oliver Wendell Holmes at 60, Brandeis at 60, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, if I'm not mistaken, at 60, and many others, 60, 55. Those are generally the right age. And if you serve 18 years, that's about right. At the time of the framing of the Constitution, when they talked about good behavior or lifetime appointments, the average life expectancy was in the 50s, and justices were appointed in their 40s or 50s. So early on in history, the average justice served relatively short terms. There were exceptions. Chief Justice John Marshall, appointed at a relatively young age by John Adams as he was leaving office. He was a kind of part of the midnight judges. served for a long, long time, served as the longest Chief Justice in the history of the United States, and served with extraordinary distinction. So, look, there's never a free lunch. You lose something when you have 18-year terms. You lose something when you have mandatory retirement terms, but you also gain something. And ultimately, I think it has to do with democracy. There's something very undemocratic about people being appointed for life. Again, kings, popes, professors, okay, those are not democracies. Kings are not part of a democracy, they're counter democracy. Pope is obviously not running a democratic institution. There have been great, great popes who have served for long, long periods of time. And professors are different. Tenure is supposed to serve an interest in promoting academic freedom, whether it does or not. We can debate on another show. But judges, I don't think so. I don't think so. I think 18-year terms, 20-year terms, we can debate the number of years. Could it be done without amending the Constitution? We don't know for sure. One thing is clear. It couldn't be applied to any sitting justices without amending the Constitution. Right now, a justice who has been appointed, including soon-to-be Justice Barrett, has the right to serve out her term under existing law, which is until she retires, dies, or engages in not good behavior, which I don't think is going to happen. But could a statute be passed defining the term good behavior to mean 18, 20 years? I don't think so. I think it would require a constitutional amendment, but there are some scholars who say as long as it's applied only to future justices, not to current justices or judges, maybe it would withstand constitutional analysis. There are some state cases that have held that you could change the law and make lifetime appointments into term limits or into mandatory retirement situations. So I'm not sure about that. What I am sure is that lifetime appointment under the Constitution is anachronistic, does not make sense in a democracy. We live in an age where lots of people are calling for term limits. After all, the original Constitution didn't impose term limits on the president. It was George Washington who established a tradition of 2 terms, and Franklin Delano Roosevelt broke that tradition, and a constitutional amendment was enacted now requiring a president to serve no more than 2 terms. There are no term limits on the Senate or the House of Representatives. There's a lot of movement toward that, particularly by Republicans. It'd be interesting to see if Republicans supported a movement toward term limits for justices of the Supreme Court if they were made prospective. So on the Der Show today, you've heard 2 relatively unrelated issues. One, the public's right to know. We have a right to know if that laptop belonged to Hunter Biden and if the emails were real. We have the right to decide whether or not that's relevant. In my mind, I doubt it would be very relevant in my vote, but it might be relevant in your vote. And it's not up to NPR to tell us what's relevant. What NPR should be doing is telling us what the facts are. And my second point was about terms for justices of the Supreme Court, which I think would be a good idea, but I'm not sure it could be done consistent with the Constitution. Now I want to hear your views on the Der Show. Now it's your turn to ask me questions. Martin from Boca Raton.
My question today has to do with a topic which seems to get a lot of airtime, not only from you, but the 2 political candidates. And that involves the Roe versus Wade decision and the controversy all around that issue. It seems to me very, very easy to determine, or it should be relatively easy to determine, after almost over 50 years of us landing on the moon, that we have the technology to determine when a fetus is indeed viable. If indeed it's not viable, you're not committing any moral or physical sin by taking the life of someone if that fetus is not a physically viable human being. If indeed it is, it's a different decision. So why not, in light of the technology which we have worldwide now, simply make the decision at what point is a fetus viable? And at that point, we know whether there's any sin involved or tragedy involved in taking the life or not taking the life of a viable fetus. That's all I have to say about it. Thank you.
It's a very interesting question. Thank you. But of course, many religions disagree with you. The Catholic Church and many Protestants say that life begins at conception and viability is just one station along the road to ultimate independent human life. There are those who agree with you and say that the moment the fetus is viable, that is capable of surviving outside of the womb of the mother, then it's a human life. Viability still probably is a matter partially of science and partially of degree. But for many people, viability is the critical factor. And so the question then is it up to the courts or up to the legislatures? Is it up to the national government? Is it up to the state governments? Those issues will still remain because viability is criteria only for some people, not for all people. Our next call is from San Francisco. Joe.
Hi, Mr. Dershowitz. I call you second time, and you did not return my call about what go on in the United States and what I agree or disagree with, what happened here. I'm Jew from Ukraine, and at time that it was more than 20 years ago, 20, even 40 years ago, the Angela Davis was a role model like Che Guevara in Soviet Union. We got meetings in her support. She is a communist and piece of something you know what. That's why I know if she is role model and greatest in United States, this is fall of United States forever. She is not like communist like you know about. In this way, my phone is call me. You will have fun on more other issue.
I'm sorry, I didn't get back to you earlier. I didn't get your first call. As you know, I don't think Angela Davis is a role model. She was a Stalinist, a supporter of Joseph Stalin, a believer in Soviet repression. She refused to stand up for the rights of Soviet dissidents, calling them fascists and opponents of socialist democracy. She was indicted, acquitted to be sure, of charges relating to the murder of a police officer or a prison guard. She has preached violence and radicalism. I don't think she's a role model. I think it tells us more about the New York Times than it does about America in general when the New York Times lists her among the great people of America without telling the full story of her commitment to values that are antagonistic to democratic values, American values, and values of racial equality. So I don't agree with some of the words you used in characterization, but I surely agree, as I said earlier on the show, that she should not have been included among the great Americans who serve as role models for our young people. Our next call is from Indiana. Tom.
But I would like to brag about you. I really appreciate your outspoken voice and not afraid to speak out, which is one of the problems this USA has got today. Too many people hold it in. But I think you're a very truthful man, and the combination of those two things is very powerful. Thank you again. Goodbye.
Thank you. That was very nice of you. But, you know, it imposes a cost to speak out. I've lost friends as a result of speaking out. I've lost fans and supporters. People love when you speak out on their side. But when you speak out in a neutral way and when you're not on one side or the other, you tend to lose support. On the Der Show, you're always going to hear both sides of every issue. You're never going to hear partisan analysis, and you're always going to hear it straight from me. So thanks so much for your call. Our last call for today on the Der Show is Harvey from Henderson.
Good morning, Harvey Cohn in Nevada, but born and raised in Brooklyn for the first 25 years of my life. Through Facebook, I've kept in touch with probably hundreds of kids I grew up with. Many of them went to the schools you went to. They were born and raised in your neighborhood. I love Megyn Kelly. She's brilliant. But Megyn and your entire family are wrong. You must continue to defend yourself and to continue to fight. The best way to prove it would be to do a poll. If you poll 2,000 to 5,000 Jews, or just 2,000 to 5,000 regular people in the population, you would be shocked at what the last year has done to your reputation and your credibility within the American community, and especially our own tribe. A vast majority of Jews hate Trump so bad they will never forgive you for arguing in defense of his constitutional rights. Do a poll, prove to Megan and your family they are wrong, and they will all support you. Thank you for having Megan on as a guest. She's brilliant, love her, but in this case, she's wrong. Have a great day. Bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you for reminding me of my good old days in Brooklyn. I lived in Brooklyn until I was about 21 or so, and then I went off to law school. But my mother lived there for all of her life, and so I would go back and visit quite a bit. Look, people hate me because I defended the Constitution on behalf of President Trump. That's never going to change, and I don't have to fight back against that. That I don't care about. People have the right to dislike me because of my constitutional views. That's okay. Where I need to fight back, I think, and where Megyn Kelly and I had some disagreement, is the false accusations of sexual misconduct by a woman I never met, never heard of. And I have to continue to fight back because I'm a victim, and victims should speak out, just like victims of sexual abuse should speak out. Victims of false accusations of sexual abuse should speak out. Otherwise, it's going to get worse. We should not be silenced. Megyn Kelly herself was a victim, and she helped give voice to other victims in the movie Bombshell and other ways. And so why distinguish between victims of sexual abuse, who everybody says, including Megyn Kelly, should speak out, and victims of false accusations of sexual abuse, which I am one. And so I'm thinking seriously about how to respond, but I'm in lawsuits now, so I have to respond. But again, victims should speak out, and I'm a victim, and as a victim, I want my voice to be heard to make sure that there are no other victims, and that other victims as well speak out. So thank you all for tuning in to the Dersh Show. I'm sure we'll have more about the coming election, have more about the Supreme Court nomination, about Supreme Court cases, and about any other issues that interest you. We want you to call. We want to hear your views. The phone number is 216-710-0050. That's 216-710-0050. Your voice is an important part of the show. We're available to take your calls 24/7 at 216-710-0050. The Dersh Show is available on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, and anywhere else where you hear your podcast. So please, we want you to listen and watch The Dersh Show.